Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again. Today I'm reviewing Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, one of those books I've always meant to read, one of the great shames, I think, of my life, because even though it doesn't really fall in my area of specialism, I am still a PhD. I'm actually a doctor as of now. In English literature, so it was high time I read it. And when I started reading Jane Eyre, with the first couple of chapters, I had this weird feeling. I had this sense that I was enjoying reading it, it was entertaining. If you take one thing away from this review, is that Jane Eyre, it's a very entertaining, it's a very readable novel that's absolutely enjoyable from start to finish. But I also had this sense that the book wasn't giving me much. I had this sense that I had kind of already read it, that it had permeated for like future literature and the rest of culture, both with its plot and with its reflections. It was so influential, in fact, that I had nothing to gain from reading it, that I kind of already knew it from other sources. But that was obvious bullshit. One of the great immediate pleasures of Jane Eyre, once I sat down and stopped thinking stupid stuff, was that one of the most basic, but possibly the most useful, the most powerful, the most relevant functions of literature, which is the way it connects us with other people and makes us experience the world through other people's perspective, through their experiences, through their eyes, which is something other media cannot quite achieve in the same way, and it's something that's very useful and very relevant to everyone. Being able to understand that other people just experience the world differently makes it so much more difficult for everyone to be an asshole and a racist and other awful things. What I'm talking about specifically, a good example would be reading about Jane's experience in her school, having to walk in winter to that awful church where she just has to listen to 2 different services before she has to walk back through the cold, through the freezing countryside, all the way back to her school, with kids dropping left and right from malnourishment and from all those awful 19th century diseases. Understanding how people, what kind of pain people went through, what kind of hardship people had to withstand. Well, it puts into perspective the horror of queuing 10 minutes to get into the supermarket and maybe not finding the brand of flour you're used to. So Jane Eyre is a testimony to the immense pain people had to go through, good people had to go through, and women in particular had to suffer. But make no mistake, it's not just its content, it's not just this picture that's valuable, the way it's presented, the language of the novel, it's just masterful. One of my favorite things in Jane Eyre, I think, is the way at given times in the course of the novel, the narrative tense shifts from the past to the present, and immediately you see what Jane herself is seeing, and you feel like you're immersed in the scene through this masterfully shift in tense. I almost said that the feeling of it is cinematic, but I feel like that's misleading, because if anything, I have a sense that cinema learned a lot of tricks from literature, it's not the other way around. And it definitely makes these scenes, these moments where this technique is used, more engaging. You feel like you're living them together with Jane, and because they are moments of great doubt, great uncertainty, great fear, the first of them, of course, where Jane decides to take up her position in Thornfield. She arrives close to this new mansion, she doesn't know anyone, she is in this foreign land, she doesn't know what's going to happen to her, who are the people she's going to work for, everything's up in the air, she's just on the cusp of this new experience, and you absolutely understand and perceive her own feelings and her own anxiety. A few years ago, ages ago, I filmed a video about Lisa Sunshine's theory of mind. Lisa Sunshine is a literary critic, and in one of her books she develops this theory that we read fiction and we appreciate fiction because in fiction we can train our understanding of other people's reactions and of how other people's minds work. We can observe the way people interact with the world and with other characters, and so learn how that is supposed to work in real life. And that's the reason why books that leave a lot to be inferred are more difficult than books that state characters' emotional reactions very explicitly. And that's the reason why we enjoy reading fiction, to train our theory of mind in a safe environment. And I think that offers very interesting insight into certain psychological consequences of reading fiction, but I feel like the theory as a whole doesn't stand up, most notably because there's this idea that descriptions, allegedly, are boring, because when you read a description you cannot train your theory of mind. You're not really looking at the way characters react to try and second guess what the reaction would be or how they will interact with other people. You're just confronted with words that describe something. But the point is, descriptions are beautiful and are wonderful in Jane Eyre, and again give the whole novel a wonderful sense of place, a very beautiful Gothic-like sense of these environments where the novel takes place, the school, Thornfield, the moors surrounding it. All of it is very bleak, and it definitely characterizes Jane's approach, attitude to life, the terrible pain she has gone through and she has to confront time and again, and the way nature interacts with the character's situation forms a background to the novel, I would say, that's almost as enjoyable as the narrative itself, and almost offers a counterpoint to the events going on in the book. I spoke about how masterful the narrative style of Jane Eyre is, but the narrative pace, the narrative itself, the way it's presented, might be the book's greatest achievement. I swear, the mystery at the heart of the book was so very well presented and so wonderfully hinted at, and Charlotte Bronte really knows how to give you just enough to whet your appetite without really revealing too much, while giving you enough red herrings that it's believable that you will just be completely surprised when the final revelation comes up. And to be honest, I really envy anyone who doesn't know the story of Jane Eyre enough to be able to appreciate the book without any prior understanding. Of course I knew about the main revelation in the novel, who doesn't these days? But I assume that reading it in the 19th century, reading it when it came out, or reading it from an entirely unknowing perspective, must be quite an experience. Jane Eyre is a very Christian book. Although some of its reflections were taken as revolutionary at the time, the author was a mild conservative actually, and definitely the character, the narrator's attitude and outlook on life comes from the perspective of a devoted Christian once more, and of somebody who believes in phrenology and puts quite a lot of trust in it. And these things might look like a problem or an issue to somebody who doesn't share these beliefs. Hopefully no one believes in phrenology, the study of people's facial features and physical features in general as revealing of their inner workings, so that if somebody has a white forehead, they're a criminal, something like that. Hopefully no one believes in that stuff anymore, and readers these days might be Christian or might not be, but even if you don't subscribe to the same ideology as the narrator, hopefully you will still be able to appreciate a world and an entire fictional cosmos that's created according to those laws. A clear example would be the fact that in this novel a lot of time is dedicated to describing people's faces, because those descriptions are supposed to give you a sense of what the characters will turn out to be like, so that an apparently virtuous character who has, I don't know, a big nose, it turns out that, oh, actually they were weak all along and you should have known by the big nose. And that's obviously bollocks and bogus. But I still think that you can appreciate this type of, the way narrative and fiction can create a cosmos that follows these arbitrary rules, even just because that helps you to understand better these type of rules and the reasons why people subscribe to them in the past and put a lot of trust into them. But let's get to the core of Jane Eyre, the romance, and that Rochester guy. I remember when Wonder Woman came out a few years back, the Warner Bros. Movie, everyone was so freaked out because basically what happens in that movie is that the male protagonist He's a bit helpless. Wonder Woman has to save him all the time, but he's also really, like, he's a hunk, he's ripped, he has his shirt off a lot of the time. Basically, the role he plays is the role that women characters would normally play in previous superhero or action movies, and everyone was, oh, this is so revolutionary, they just completely reversed this gender roles. No, Charlotte Bronte did that centuries ago. The beautiful reversal of gendered roles in the book is one of the most fascinating facets and elements of the relationship between Rochester and Jane Eyre, and the way it's played out. And make no mistake, Rochester is still quite abusive, in my opinion, and hopefully in anyone's opinion, with Jane. But I feel like their relationship can be read as in extremely simplistic terms, or can also be appreciated for its actual complexity. I do believe that it's more complex and more layered than it's sometimes taken to be. The risk on the one hand is to read Jane Eyre the way people very often read works like Great Gatsby or Romeo and Juliet, which are very complex works of fiction that complicate our assumptions about love. Does Gatsby really love Daisy if he's unable to be with her unless she swears that she never loved anyone ever? Who knows? Similarly, I feel like it's easy to read Jane's relationship with Rochester as very simply, oh, they're so in love, or they should just be together, oh, the pain, they can't be. Or to understand that it's more complicated than that, that maybe they cannot be together because they're not really thinking or approaching the relationship in the healthiest possible way. And tell you what, I don't want to clog the review with with content that's too specific, and even more importantly, I don't want to spoil any part of the book to anyone, so I'll put a link in a corner of the video and in the description box to a separate video where I focus a bit more on certain aspects of the book I want to discuss. Check it out if you're interested, or don't. Overall, I couldn't have been more wrong thinking that I didn't have anything to gain from reading Jane Eyre directly, even if it was just to appreciate the masterful use of language and of narrative that Charlotte Bronte displays in the novel. There's a marvelous, a magnificent postmodern passage late into the novel where another character is conversing with Jane, and this character, she was sure that my previous history, if known, would make a delightful romance. Rollover, Kanye, isn't that some serious bragging? Overall, I adored Jane Eyre. I think it's a wonderful novel, a magnificent portrait of a real evil villain, and no, I'm not talking about Bertha. Please refer to that same video to hear more about that. What did you think of Jane Eyre? What was your experience with such a big piece of the British canon? What did you appreciate it when you read it? Did you know the story and the plot and what was going to happen, or didn't you? Was it a shock? Wasn't it? I'd really look forward to discussing the book in the comment section, as always. Thank you as always for watching the review, guys. Please let's discuss it, and bye, guys.